Welcome back to the Way Out West YouTube channel. Good to see you again. Isn't it fantastic news that we now no longer have those strict restrictions on the amount of people that can come to our gigs? Fantastic. Today we present an interview with the incredible, multi-talented Kerri Simpson. Kerri talks about her influences, her trips to New Orleans, Jazz Fest, her strong connection with Haiti and the Voodoo religion, the Melbourne music family, and a very enlightening insight into her first-hand experiences with racism. Please hit the subscribe button and the like buttons and enjoy our interview with Kerri.
Yeah, it was because my dad played accordion, and I played accordion from the age of 6. So, and he was from the north of England, so mum's Australian. And so when people came round, the accordions would come out and we'd sit around and everybody'd have a sing-song and play music. He wasn't a professional musician, but I sort of was playing around, at parties and stuff with Dad since I was a kid, So Mum loved to sing. So, yeah, always was. And then when I was in my early teens, very early teens, I discovered my uncle had some Bessie Smith records, which I borrowed off him and never gave back. And so I just sort of fell in love with the blues. But I grew up out in Epping, so out in the northern suburbs. So, and obviously pre-internet, so it was really hard to find out about blues. But my uncle had a lot of jazz and blues records, so I used to sort of borrow his stuff. And I just always loved it. But it wasn't until I sort of got to 18 and started going to uni that that's when I met Steve Purcell and Kenny Farmer, and they were playing in a band called the Echo Vampers. And when that band sort of dissolved, Ken and Steve and I put a band together with called what were we called? The Five Aces, and that was Vernon Gibson, who was down from Queensland, who was a mate of Steve's, and Sammy Semple on sax, Jimmy Beck on sax, Steve on bass, of course, and Kenny on drums. So that was really my first start as a singer professionally. I'd done little, gigs playing bass and playing guitar in sort of kiddie bands around the place for a couple of years, but nothing like that was the first real gig, proper gig I had. Yeah. Cool. It was pretty hard to get a lot of records. So Ken and Chris Farmer have a massive record collection. So Ken used to lend me records of different singers and all that kind of thing. Big Maybelle, I loved. And of course, all the obvious ones like Etta James and stuff, Ruth Brown, those kind of things. We did a lot of that kind of material. But I was lucky because the Five Aces sort of evolved partly then into the Swinging Sidewalks, and that had such a huge lineup of people with so many different influences that I was just getting music from all different kinds of, genres and different players. But I think Bessie was always, the first love. And I think that's why I developed such a big voice, because I just spent years of my life in the lounge room singing into a broomstick. I realised that all the music that I really like, so very early Rod Stewart and the Faces, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, all those kind of British bands sort of hark back to the sort of early blues influences. Yeah. So I said what I'd grown up listening to was come from that. So then I tried to go back. So Janis Joplin, as a young teenager growing up, obviously, and wanting to be a singer, I loved Janis. And that's how I found out about Bessie Smith, because, I read it in the stories about Janis, how she put the tombstone on Bessie's grave. So then I got keen on that. And it was actually a teacher at school who was very forward-thinking, and she heard that I liked Bessie Smith, and she turned up with a book, the Chris Albertson bio, for me at school one day, and I met her years and years later, decades later, and I just thanked her so much, because if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't be a singer, I think that just happened because of the Swinging Sidewalks, because we had, at one stage, a repertoire of several hundred songs, and Stevie Purcell made up this big backdrop that had a whole list of songs on it, like 300 or 400 songs. And the audience had like little cards on their tables, and they could just yell out the number of the song and the band would play it. And of course you had people like, and so even though I didn't know all of the 400 songs, but between us we could get through those songs. So you had people like Di Jones and Dean Hilson in the band, John Boy Betros, Doug Kelly on drums. So you just, Tony Norris on trumpet. So you just had this huge variety of influences. John Boy was into reggae. That's how I kind of learned about reggae. You know, Di was into a whole bunch of the old 50s stuff and 40s. So it was really through that I learned to improvise, to sort of get along even if I didn't really know the song, and B, just got across so many different styles of music. And of course, we were young and carefree in those days. So even though I had a day job teaching, you know, we'd go and do a gig on a Tuesday night and then all go across the road to Dean Hilson. And that was at the Prince Pat, in Fitzroy on Victoria Parade. And then we'd all go across to Dean Hilson and Paul Cummings' place across the road. We used to call Sunnyside. And then we'd stay up all night just jamming, you know. So I think that's really how I ended up being able to get across so many genres. That was with the Neville Brothers nephews. So just to straighten up that story, I was staying next door to Cyril Neville at his sister-in-law's house. But yeah, so their nephews were friends of family, and the first band that I sang in New Orleans was with a guy called George Housey. And we used to go around to rehearse at his house, and his mum, Thelma Housey, used to sing gospel in church. She was a deacon in her church. So she took me to church to sing with her. And later on, different trips, you know, she'd come around each morning and teach me a gospel song and bring me a plate of grits and sausage and stuff. And we'd sit around and talk about gospel and sing and talk about life. You know, she was an amazing woman. So it was through that connection in the very like mid-80s. Then when I went back years later, of course, all the little kids and stuff had grown up, and Norman Caesar and Ricky Caesar, who are now part of the Caesar Brothers Funk Box, they were grown men then. So we were I'd been to Haiti and done all these field recordings, and Norman and Ricky and I got together with a few of the locals, Jason Neville and a few of the locals. And we got together and wrote a bunch of songs at Norman's little studio in the 13th Ward. And that became, part of all those sort of New Orleans tracks on the Voodoo Songs of the Spirits album. So that's sort of how it came about. But when I was over there, Norman asked me to, would I, you know, come and play at Jazz, because they play there every year, pretty much. They have. So he asked me, would I come and sing? So of course I said yes. But to my knowledge, I think I'm the first Australian woman to play at Jazz Fest.
Religion and meet Sallie and Glassman.
Well, I used to go and hang out in the French Quarter in a cafe. It was on the corner of Decatur Street and near the French Market. I can't remember the name of the cafe, but there's a few Aussies that used to hang out there. So I'd sometimes go down there for breakfast and hang out in the quarter. And I was interested in getting a veve, which is a ritual drawing that they do in Voodoo, used to invoke the spirits. And each veve represents a different spirit or combination of spirits. And people in New Orleans get them in voodoo shops on maybe little pieces of paper and carry them around, saying their wallet, you know, for good luck to get the money and stuff like that. So I was interested in that, and I was chatting in this cafe, and the guy behind the bar said, oh, my wife does veve tattoos. I went, okay, yeah, right. So I organised to meet. So I went up to the 13th Ward and met Sallie Ann. That's how I met her. And she just struck me as a really straightforward, honest, sort of passionate person about it. So, and she also had this amazing love. She's an artist, and she had this amazing love of Australian Indigenous art, and Indigenous culture. So we just sort of sat around, and she'd tell me about voodoo and explain stuff, because I didn't really know anything about it. And I thought, you know, there's a good chance to actually see what the real deal is about it. And then I'd tell her what I knew about Indigenous culture. So that's how we sort of became mates. And then, and it just struck me as a really sensible way to kind of look at the world, if you will. So I just kind of studied it, and eventually years later, I came up with the idea of like doing field recordings. And turning them into an album. And the idea initially was to do that and use the money that was made from the album to send back to Haiti. But when I got there, it turned out a few of the connections that I'd spent years putting together were a little bit corrupt. So in the end, that didn't happen. But yeah, so Sallie Ann goes over to Haiti several times a year. She was initiated there. So I went on a trip with her and a couple of other people, some filmmakers, from California. They were making a film about Sallie and her her temple. And so I went along because I figured it was, kind of safe to sort of go with people you knew. And so, yeah. And when I was there, her ungan, her priest, I suppose, is a guy called Papa Edgar. Sorry, I'm frazzled after a day of teaching. I'll get the right name to you. He's quite a famous voodoo artist. There seems to be a lot of correlation between the practice and art. He makes a lot of those sequin flags that they have, and they use them in ceremonies. Initially, I think they sewed sequins onto bits of material because they used to conduct the ceremonies, privately and quietly and hidden away, and so that the sequins would reflect the firelight, usually at night, and a little bit replicate sort of stained glass windows that you'd get in a church. So that's where that came, and he sort of developed his own sort of style of those. They're called drapeau flags, basically. So I can get all the proper spellings to you, Bernie, sorry. And he took a great shine to me. And again, he was very interested in Australian Indigenous culture, and there was a lot of correlation between what I knew about our Indigenous spiritual sort of practices and beliefs and the voodoo kind of stuff. So that was good. And got back to New Orleans and did the recordings with Norman and Ricky and the boys. And then I was initiated in Sallie's in New Orleans. Yeah, look, I've been thinking about this since you contacted me last week. I think what's important about Way Out West, I think in the 90s there was a sort of bit of a migration by a lot of musicians over to the West, and there was no real kind of outlet for people to play over that side of town. So I think Way Out West was kind of sort of forged the way in that, in giving people a place to play, not just people from the West, but from all over town and international people. But it created a real community and a real focus point for which people could, share music and good times. So, and the thing I really loved about it, sorry, I'm thinking back years ago. Just think about this today. It reminds me of like the little sort of neighborhood bars and community centers in New Orleans, in that, you get people from all across the divide who are in there. It's a really comfy place. Kids can go. You've got people from all walks of life. There's great music, great food. There's no pretense. It's all just very communal. And as a musician, you get treated really respectfully, which doesn't happen everywhere. So, Alison and I did the Bluebirds little project the year or so before with Barbie Waters and Susanna Espy. And we always sort of really loved playing together. And we always kept joking about it'd be really good to make a really tough sort of punky blues band, wouldn't it, And so we talked about that quite a bit. And then, time went on, and eventually it just sort of came, and I sort of said to Alison, I reckon Shorty, Anthony Short would be the perfect drummer for this, really swampy, grungy. So we asked Shorty, and we went over to Jeff Lang's studio one night and just started playing, and it just worked. So Jeff just pressed the record button. So a few of the tracks on that album, just like basically the first time we've actually played together. Sugar Baby and James Dean was the first time we ever played, Wow. And the other tracks are like, things where Jeff would say, can we just do one more? We just need, it's like, I've got to go to work in the morning, So, all right then, and so I just sort of basically busted it up on the spot. But I think that's what makes the album work so well. It's just so spontaneous, and just that combination of the three of us with Jeff doing the production just seems to work, just gels, I think it is. But I think because, the music industry is really difficult, and to actually survive through it, you get, I think, maybe when you're young, you've sort of got ideas of glory and grandeur, but as you you know, if you sort of survive in it for longer than a few years, you sort of realise that it's got to be a communal, collaborative sort of effort, or else it's just too hard. You know, the outside factors of being, you know, the impact on being a musician are too hard. So I think that sense of that community between musicians is because of that. That's why people are happy to help out and look after each other and be there when, you know, times are tough, because you just don't have those kind of fallback positions that other maybe industries do, you know. But also, I guess people, you know, it's all creative people and people with an absolute passion for music. So you don't last too long in the industry if you don't actually have that. So when you've got a whole bunch of people who are, you know, love music that much, you know, I guess it's kind of natural that you kind of hit it off and find mutual ground that you can discuss and play together. Yes. So in those days, I was just singing a lot of blues and R&B and jazz and gospel and stuff. But I'd been to New Orleans and I'd seen, and, you know, played in New Orleans and stuff, and I'd seen the way that black musicians were treated and the sort of level of racism even then in New Orleans. So, and I saw it because I, you know, had friends in the African-American community. I just saw how it impacted on them and how they felt about it. So when I came home, I didn't really feel like I should do a blues album, but I wanted to do something. So I thought I'd embark on the rock path. So I did 3 albums, Veve, which is the first one, The Arousing, and then Speak. And actually The Arousing went #1 on this little radio station in Berlin, alongside Beth Orton and Fiona Apple in those days. And it did really well in Greece. Did well in Europe, but there were distribution problems here, so I didn't make any money out of it because it was pre sort of digital sales and stuff. So that sort of, but yeah. So I really love those albums, but I know what you mean. They're kind of, they're not for everybody, but no. You know, they I'm kind of happy with. Yeah, I think that's just ignorance. You know, I think it's just. And maybe if I'm trying to be kind, which I'm not very often, you know, it's people just don't, you know, they just haven't been in those people's shoes, so they don't understand what happens day to day. Whereas I was really lucky because I made friends with African American families, and I went and lived, you know, with them in their part of town. So I saw very quickly both sides of it. So I had, you know, racism with people making fun of me, and they'd say things to my friend like, "Oh, you got your little white meat in the back of the car," you know, things like that. When I was, you know, riding around with my godson Lyric. Yeah. But then I had other things where I was going to do gigs with my friends, and there's one particular DJ, I went to dinner at their place, and they had, like you said, you know, wall-to-wall records, you know, all black music. African-American music. And then I invited them along to this gig, and it was in what they call a black bar, in inverted commas. And they were the only, apart from me, the only two, you know, the only other white people in there. And they just turned around and said, "I can't believe you're fucking singing in a nigger bar." No. Like, fuck. Yeah. So you just kind of go, you know, but I saw it from both sides because I experienced it, and you know, because I had people, you know, paying out on me because I was white in the middle of that situation. And I got to really feel like how it feels when somebody picks on you or puts shit on you just because it's the colour of your skin. They don't know you, you know. So it taught me a lot of really good lessons, you know. And like I said, I would sit down with my mom, Thelma Housey, my friend's mum, and she would tell me stories. Her dad was a preacher, but she grew up in Baton Rouge. Through the civil rights movement and stuff, and she was telling me all this stuff about what happened, you know, when she was a little girl and things that had gone on during her lifetime, you know. So I had her, and there were other friends I met along the way in California and stuff who I could sit and talk to, you know, about those kind of things because they knew I just had a genuine interest in it. I wasn't just trying to, you know, kind of look like I was cool talking to them about it, you know. So I consider myself very lucky to have that education in life, as Chris Wilson called it.
Sure hope you enjoyed that great interview with Kerri Simpson. I sure learned a lot. Our next Way Out West gig is Sunday the 5th of December when Matty Dwyer brings his little big band down to the club and we'll be swinging from the rafters. See you there. Bye for now.